Also, I'm a little bit off my game this morning because I had a new addition this morning. My cow, Buttercup, had a calf this morning. And unless I'm mistaken, it's a girl, it's a heifer. So this is very happy news. This means that we get to pick a name. If it was a boy, we already knew the name. His name would be T-Bone. But now we get to pick a name and get to know her and raise her and all that kind of stuff rather than just, try not to get too close, you know what I mean. It also means that starting probably Friday, maybe tomorrow, I'll be getting up even earlier in the morning to milk the cow every morning. So yeah, 7 classes, 2 kids, and milking a cow, making cheese and yogurt and butter and all those kind of fun things. All right, today we are starting chapter 2, a chapter that I used to call Epistemology, but now I'm shifting to call UnMooring. Anybody do any boating? Anybody know any boating? Do you know this term, mooring? So I'm gonna very frequently use this sort of metaphor, sometimes more than a metaphor, of an anchor, like on a boat. But there's a difference between an anchor and a moor. An anchor is something that you lift up and usually you carry it in the boat, and then you can drop anchor here, you can drop anchor there, you can lift the anchor and go somewhere else for the day and then drop anchor for the night, that kind of thing, right? It's temporary, but it holds you in place while you're sleeping or doing whatever you're doing, right? Mooring is much more permanent, it's much more long-term, right? Mooring is something you do like when you go into port or you go into dock or you go into harbor or something like that. Then you moor the boat to something that's pretty much there, right? Something that's fastened to bolted into the rocks at the bottom of the ocean if you have moors, out at sea, or, actually physically attached to the harbor or the dock or whatever. So unmooring, right? It's this whole philosophical quest. We talked about that term the other day, right? Quest and questing and questioning.
Okay, let me just clarify what the other me was trying to say. As I explained in chapter 1, this is a philosophical quest. Now, in order to go on a quest, you have to let go of what's familiar. You have to call into question what you know, in the same way that a boat has to let go of its moor in order to go on its journey. The moor and the anchor are metaphors or even symbols, and they're going to keep coming up again and again in future chapters. This chapter is about epistemology, which is about questioning what we think we know, what we think we're certain about. There are many things that we believe strongly, and epistemology is a tool that helps us to ask ourselves, wait, this thing that I believe, is it really true? If it's true, then it'll stand up to questioning and we can proceed being even more certain and more confident about it. But if it's not true, then don't we want to know that as soon as possible before we make a big decision based on bad information?
So we're just starting this philosophical quest, so we're kind of unmooring, finding out what holds us where we are, so what anchors our understanding. This word epistemology. Epistemology is what I wrote my dissertation on. Epistemology is a fancy word, and we'll talk about what it means in a second. But every topic in philosophy, there's always sort of a question that drives it, a question behind the topic. So now the topic is epistemology. The question that's behind epistemology is this: how do we know what we know? How do we know what we know? So questioning our understanding of what we know or what we think we know. Why would that be useful? Why would that be helpful to know what we know in 2022? In daily life. Have you ever been told something and then find out later that it wasn't true? Yeah? Once or twice? Yeah? Sometimes big important things that you knew and then you find out later that they weren't true. Has anybody ever lied to you intentionally or accidentally? Once or twice today, maybe? Epistemology gives us a power so that we aren't fooled, or so that we're not as easily fooled, right? So that we can tell if somebody's gaslighting us, if somebody's deceiving us, or trying to manipulate us, or trying to trick us, or trying to, something like that. So, we get lied to every day, don't we? We see so many advertisements, and advertisements are pretty much all lies, right? Deceiving us, trying to manipulate us, getting to cultivate a desire for whatever product they're trying to sell. If we don't want to be gaslighted or manipulated or deceived or fooled or any of those kind of things, then we have to ask that question, how do we know what we know. Sometimes we get told things that aren't true, and then so the question is like, how do we know what we know? All right, so how do we know what we know? Now there's lots of different ways to ask this question. In philosophy, the way that you ask the question has a big impact on how you answer the question. I mean, not just in philosophy, but in anything, right? If you're, the old saying that like, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? Like, if this is the tool you got, then you're like,
I need a hammer, not a spoon.
Actually, this happens to me all the time. Like all the time I live on a farm, there's always something to fix. And like I need a hammer, so I go in and get a hammer. And then like walking across the yard and I see something else that needs to be fixed. And I'm like, maybe I could just hit it with a hammer. And usually it makes it worse.
You're not gonna need a hammer. You need a shovel.
The way you ask the question has a big impact on how you answer the question. So let's think about some different ways to ask this question. Let's use this question, how do we know what we know? And let's use that to like anchor our discussion, anchor our discourse. So let's put that question at the middle of the circle. We'll talk about phenomenology in the next chapter. But let's put that at the center of the circle. And let's think about some different ways that we can ask the question, right? Let's try and come at this question. Let's try and rephrase this question in a number of different ways. The first one is like this word, epistemology. Where did this word come from? This is the way that philosophers, at least in the West, comes from the Greek. So from the Greek Western tradition, they've kind of summarized this question in terms of this word. So let's kind of think about what that word means. I pulled out my old Greek English lexicon and looked up the word epistemology or episteme. The word episteme, a little bit of a flex, but also a point to this. Epi meaning on, and steme meaning standing. All philosophers are searching for something real. And of course, there's always going to be some exceptions, but for the most part, this is true. That all philosophers, east, west, up, down, all over the place, they're searching for something real.
What is real? How do you define real?
They use other words, so they don't all use exactly this word, but they use other words that mean the same thing. The word real in philosophy means that which is unchanging, that which is permanent, that which is reliable. Why do you want something real? Because you want something that you can always count on, right? Something that's always going to be the same, no matter what. If you find one thing that's always reliable, that's always unchanging, that's constant, that's permanent, that's right, unchanging, then you can build your whole system of philosophy on top of it, right? You can anchor all of your knowledge, everything that you know, on that real thing. Make sense?
We'll just start with what we know. Take it from there.
Great. The idea behind this word, epistemology, is what does our knowledge stand on? And what do philosophers want to find that their knowledge can stand on? Something that's unchanging, something that's permanent, right? Something that's rock solid, that never changes. So this is the question of epistemology. Where does our knowledge stand on, right? So I mean, using the example that I gave of the Bible when I was a kid, right? So then people say all kinds of stuff. People change, teachings change, we grow and we mature and we understand ourselves and the world around us differently. But the text doesn't change, right? The Bible is there, the Bible doesn't change. So then you could say, well, the Bible is more reliable than the people who talk about it, right? So then the Bible is more permanent, more unchanging, more real than all the people who say all sorts of things about it, right? So then that can be a more permanent anchor. And then we can say, all right, well, I want to anchor my understanding in that, right? Or in the text of Plato, or in the writings of Shakespeare, or in whatever thing that's a little bit less temporary. We did talk about that the other day, about how we make decisions, right? And emotions and things are on the outside. Emotions and states of mind are on the outside of that circle. Why are they on the outside of that circle? Because they're more temporary than the things inside, right? So if we want to make consistent, reliable, good decisions, which is the goal of philosophy, whatever we put at the center, we want to be not like subject to the whim of our emotions or our states of mind or how we're feeling that day or what the weather is like or whatever, right? But we want to put it in something much more permanent. So we want something at the center of our systematic philosophy that's much more firm, right? Starting already to see why I use this anchor, right? And UnMooring, we're talking about those kind of things. So philosophers, when they ask this question about epistemology, how do we know what we know? They're searching for what does our knowledge stand on? So that's one way to say it. What does our knowledge stand on? And that phrase, stand on, that's literally what the word epistemology means. standing on? What does it stand on? But part of why I gave you the Greek is because there's a couple of other words that, like, if you look it up in the lexicon, Greek-English lexicon, you'll see this other word right beside it, epistasis. Remember way back on that first day of class, the first lecture, I said there's a number of reasons why we study philosophy. I answered that question again in the last class. So why do we study philosophy? What's the point of studying philosophy? What's the goal? Why would any of us want to study philosophy? Yeah, it's always going to be a great answer, right? To make better decisions. So one of the ways we make better decisions is by having firmer understanding. And if we have a firmer understanding, then that makes us that. What was another reason that I gave on that first day of class? Philosophy isn't going to cure our anxiety, but it can help us deal with anxiety, right? It's not going to help us. We can't deal with anxiety over the long term without philosophy. In fact, this word epistasis that's right beside the word episteme, which have the same prefix, epi, and stasis, like stasis. Stasis also kind of means like standing, right? Etymologically, they almost mean exactly the same thing. This we might take to mean around. Epi can also mean around. But this word, epistasis, doesn't mean the study of knowledge and what we know. The study of this epistasis means anxiety. Isn't that interesting? Why would those two words that etymologically are almost identical have such very different meanings, right? These are the kind of things that Socrates and other philosophers think about a lot, right? Our language kind of tells us something about the human psyche and how humans sort of thought about things from the beginning, discovering the human mind and that kind of stuff. If you feel like somebody's trying to gaslight you, does that make you feel anxious? Why? Yeah, which then makes you question what's true and what's not true, right? I thought this was true, and now this person's saying that this is not true or whatever. What about, have you ever been in a situation where you just like were really, really nervous and uncomfortable and like you didn't know the people around you and you weren't sure, you know, like maybe it's late at night and it's dark.
We shouldn't be out here in the dark.
And you're in a club or something like that and like you don't know any of the people around you and you don't know, like, I don't know, you've been in a situation where you're uncomfortable?
I still feel very uncomfortable in closets.
Right? And how does that make you feel anxiety, right? So what is that anxiety, describe that anxiety. Where's that anxiety coming from? I mean, obviously it's coming from that situation, but what about that situation causes anxiety? Yeah. Right? You don't know what the people around you are going to do or think. Yeah.
What do they think of me? What do they think of me?
Yeah, so many things could happen and you really have no idea what any of them are, right? Just super unknown, super unpredictable, and that can give us anxiety. So before there was language, there were a lot of lions and tigers and things that would eat you, right? And so if you're in a state of anxiety, it's usually because you're surrounded by danger, right? And you don't know what's going to happen or something like that. When I was a kid, I was like 11 or 12. My mom was in the kitchen and I was like in the living room and I was just bored or something. I thought I'd play a trick on her. She didn't know I was in there. So when she was coming around the corner, I thought I'd jump out and like scare her. So I jumped right in front of her and like yelled like, ah! And you know what she did? Immediately punched me hard in the heart, right? And I was like, you know, like gasping, like bending over. And of course, then she realized the situation, right? While I'm like sitting there gasping and trying to recover. And once she figured out like what was going on, you know what she did? Punched me again. Harder, right? Harder the second time. Like, ah! Right? So, but that's in a state of hypervigilance, right? That fight or flight. So we know what my mom will do in a state of fight or flight. She's gonna fight, right? She did not run. That's not my mom. So what's the point? I could have multiple points, but one point is how do we know what we know? If we're more confident in what we know, if we're more certain about what we know, then if we're more certain about what we know and confident in what we know, then we're less what? Less anxious, right? Less anxiety, because we know what to expect, right? We know what's what, right? There's another word in here. This is one of the things that Socrates points out, and a number of other philosophers point out. And it's that right there in the word epistemology or episteme is this word pistos. Pistos means faith. But if you look at the word episteme, again, even if you don't know Greek, you can see a lot of similarity between the word episteme and the word pistos. So pistos is faith. right? So what gives us faith in what we know? Where does our faith come from, right? So how do we have faith in what we know? How can we be sure or certain about what we know? And part of that has to do with faith. In fact, the reason that these two words are closely aligned, as many philosophers before me have pointed out, is because in a large part, our faith in what we know comes from the people that we place our trust in. And most of the time, those people are going to be our parents, right? So we have to have faith in our caregivers, the people that raise us. And so that faith, translates into a certain kind of certainty. So we can be certain in what our parents tell us because we have faith in our parents. Therefore, how do we know what we know? Well, part of that is because we have faith in our parents. We trust what they say, right? What they've learned from us. But, sometimes our parents don't always have, our parents can make mistakes just like anyone else. So how do we know that we should take what our parents say on faith, or can we investigate, what does this knowledge stand on? What's the basis of our knowing? How can we know what we know? Another way of saying it is like, what do we put our faith in? What do we put our trust in? What do we put our confidence in, right? Faith or trust or confidence. So how do we know what we know, or where do we put our faith or our trust in, or that sort of thing? Now, one more Greek word, and I promise I'll start with the Greek. Hypostasis, 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 hypo like under, hypertension, your blood pressure is high, hypotension, your blood pressure is low, like hypothermal is low temperature, hyperthermal is a high temperature. Kind of the other side of this, like epistasis, standing around or standing on top of, versus hypostasis, standing under, right? Hupo means under, and stasis means standing. The word understanding in English is a direct translation of that word, understanding. If we're in a situation where we don't know what to expect, then I feel anxiety. But if I understand the situation, if I understand everything around me, right, then I feel more chill, more at ease, and that sort of thing. And we'll talk more about that when we get to divided line and those sort of things. Cool? Questions? So I know all of this seems a little confusing right now, right? What does the Greek have to do with anything? Why does it matter that the words epistemology and anxiety and understanding are connected in this way in the Greek? And, right, what am I trying to do here? Part of what's going on is that all the pieces in this video book are connected. So I'm trying to connect the dots for you between the things that I'm teaching you now and some of the things that I'm going to be teaching later. So I'm trying to connect the dots between the things I'm teaching now and things I'm going to be teaching later in this chapter, but also things I'm going to be teaching in later chapters, such as in chapter 5. For example, in chapter 5, we'll begin discussing the relationship between truth and knowledge. And a key point there is that understanding stands under truth. Understanding stands under truth, right? Or another way of saying that is that truth is beyond understanding. So again, what I'm doing right now is trying to teach you the basic tools, right? You've got to learn the alphabet before you can learn to read. You've got to learn the tools before you can learn how to use the tools. But right now I'm just kind of giving you the basic tools and hoping that these will begin to stick in your memory so that when we get to those later teachings, you'll be able to say, oh, okay, now I can recall the relationship between epistemology and knowledge, anxiety, and understanding, and then be able to understand those more transcendental ideas such as truth, which are always going to be beyond our understanding. That's the point. That's the point.
Time for a break.
Are you sick and tired of philosophy professors telling you that knowledge lacks epistemic grounding in reality? Are you fed up with teenagers who keep trying to walk on the sky instead of staying in their damn place? If so, Epi Boots are for you. Strap in and strap on some leather that will firmly anchor your ideology in the same place it's always been anchored, in the past. Our boots are made the way boots have always been made, by impoverished Bangladeshi children. Our boots are guaranteed to leave 2 pairs of footprints in the sand. Epi Boots. Boots that keep you grounded.
So let's think about another way, totally different way to ask this question. So one way to ask this question is, what does our knowledge stand on, right? What's the basis for our knowledge? What do we put our faith or trust in? But another way to ask this question is, what anchors our knowledge? A little bit more temporary. What anchors our knowledge? So now we're on comparative relation. And we're going to ask the same question, how do we know what we know? But ask it in this other way. What anchors our knowledge, right? There's this kid that I want you to know his name. His name is Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas, because that's what his parents named him, and Cusa of Cusa, because that's where he's from, right? He's from Kuz, or Kuz, Germany, 1401 to 1464. He's a really cool guy up there. In my book, is one of the greatest philosophers ever. That's why I wrote my dissertation about him. He wrote this book called De Docta Ignorantia, so in Latin now. De Docta Ignorantia, which in English translates as on learned ignorance. We'll talk a lot this semester about that word ignorance or ignoring. Unlearned ignorance. What do you think that means? Before I even tell you what it means, what is it? I mean, it's a weird phrase, right? Unlearned ignorance. What do you think it means? Yeah, give it a shot. Yeah, so discovering things that we thought were true that then we realize are not true, right? So learning things that we didn't know. Good. What else could it mean? What is ignorance? What do we think the word ignorance means? That's a good, I like the way you're saying it, right? Maybe they're choosing or maybe they're not choosing, but they are ignoring, right? So ignoring something that's not there, right? So they're focused on this thing, but they're ignoring something else, right? So
Ignore them.
that's exactly right. So unlearning our ignorance then for Kusa means learning, discovering, realizing these things that we've been ignoring. Right?
Stop ignoring me!
Right? There's things that are just right there around us that we've been ignoring, and start paying attention to them, right? So then we can be more confident in what we know, right? So how do we know what we know is another way of saying, what are we ignoring?
What have we overlooked?
Right? What are we leaving out? What are we ignoring? So let's pay attention to what we're ignoring.
The point is, have we overlooked something?
He wrote this book while he was on a boat.
I'm on a boat!
He's on a boat, and one of the things that he realized, like he's on this boat sailing in the Mediterranean Sea. He had just come back from Constantinople, became Istanbul. There's that song, right?
I do know Istanbul is Constantinople.
So it was Constantinople at the time, and he was just coming back from there on his boat with like the leader of the Orthodox Church and from the Eastern Orthodox Church, and coming back to Rome. And they were on a boat, and he was looking over at the shore, right? And he could see the shore in the far distance. But it looked like the shore was moving, and he felt perfectly still because, you know, he's on a sailboat, so they're moving with the wind, so they don't feel any wind, even though they're moving with the wind, because that's, right? They're moving at the same speed as the wind, so you don't feel the wind. The wind is what's moving you, but everything seems still, right? Usually when you're moving, you feel the wind, but if you're on a sailboat, then you don't, right? So when the wind is blowing hard, the boat's going fast, but you don't feel any wind, which is kind of weird, right? And then you can see the world around you, but it feels like you're standing still and everything around you. I mean, it depends on how big the boat is, right? If it's a small boat, you know you're moving, right? But if it's a big boat, like the one he was on, like the boat's real stable and that kind of stuff, and the water is still and everything, and you could see the shore moving in the distance. So it looked like he felt like he was standing still, but the shore was moving. So this is when he was on the boat, noticing these things. He wrote about them in the book. And that's when he came up with this important phrase and important philosophy. Humans learn through comparative relation. We learn through comparative relation. What's one thing that you notice about any kid that's like 3, 4, 5, constantly like asking questions, right? Just so many questions. What is this? What is this? What is that? What is this? Why, right? Kids around that age are just constantly asking questions, right? And so you encounter something. Let's think back to when you're that age, like 2, 3, 4, 5, very, very early years, right? When you're just learning the world and just learning yourself, right? You encounter something and you're like, what is that?
What is that?
Right? And you ask, you want to know, what is that thing that I've never seen before? I've never seen that thing before. And you ask, what is it? Who do you ask? Parents, right? You ask your parents. You ask the parents around you, right? What is that?
Mommy, what's that?
This thing. What is this thing? And then your parents tell you, people older than you, older siblings, yeah, teachers, mentors, grandparents, family members, people around you, right? People around you. You don't go ask Google. You ask people around you. This is how we learn. This is how we learn. The very first things that we learn this way, right? And then when we encounter something different, right? Something that we haven't seen before, right? We've seen this thing, we know what it is. But then let's say we see something that like is kind of similar,
Same thing,
right? But different. Maybe it's like looks the same, but it's a different color, right?
It's not the same thing.
It is the same thing.
The same, but not the same, right? Same, but different.
Look the same, not the same thing.
Let's say you're a little kid and you see like a golden retriever and you ask, what is that?
Dad, what is that?
Your parents say, that's a dog. You're like, okay, dog. And then you see like later, you see like a tiny little chihuahua. Maybe a kid asks the parent, what is that? And they're like, well, that's also a dog. It's like, really? It's like so different than that other dog, right?
It's not the same thing.
It is the same thing.
But okay, I can kind of see like there's this dog and that dog and this dog, and they're all pretty different, but they're also pretty similar, right? And then you see a wolf and you're like, there's a dog. And your parents are like, no, actually that's a wolf, right? And so wait, what's the difference between a wolf and a dog, right? And it gets a little confusing. So we learn through comparative relation by identifying one thing that's similar but different. And then so over time, right, we encounter more and more things that are similar and different. And when you see the first one, you ask the people around you, what is that? And then the second one, maybe you ask the people around you, what is that? And then as you encounter more and more, things start to look more similar. Even though they're all still quite different, your mind is like, all right, I know what that thing is. It's why kids that are like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I mean, they're asking questions constantly. And then as they get older, we kind of like beat that out of them, right? And they like stop asking questions, right? Is this deep? Not really, is it? It's not really profound. It's not really deep. Doesn't seem like a significant philosophical realization, anything like that. Not even really worth mentioning or that kind of stuff. These first things, arche. The word arche means first. And so these are the first types of things. So when we see something for the first time, the first dog that we see, the first cat that we see, or whatever, first time we see one of those things, we call that the archetype. And we learn about the archetype primarily from parents, siblings, teachers, mentors, the people in our immediate surroundings, right? As we already said, our background and that sort of stuff. So those first things have a big impact on how we understand everything else, right? Because we understand everything else through comparative relation, right? And we all said this doesn't seem particularly deep or profound. Does it seem true? Is this consistent with your own experience? Well, let's see if is it a little bit more profound. What if I were to ask, is this epistemology, right? So what anchors our knowledge? And we understand now what anchors our knowledge. What's the answer to that question? Those archetypes, right? Those archetypes that we learn when we're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? From our parents, teachers, siblings, mentors, and those around us in our immediate surroundings. Those are what anchors our knowledge, right? Those are what anchors what we know. So how do we know what we know? Because of what we were taught when we were these ages, right? So by those people around us that give us an understanding of those archetypes. And then as we see, experience the world, we kind of put everything in comparative relation to those first archetypes that we saw, right? So then what if I were to ask, does this, everything that I just explained, is this sufficient to explain racism? Does this explain racism? What you think? What if your very first encounter with a dog was a dog that bit you? I mean, this is this thing that happens, right? There's a lot of folks and you're like, I'm scared of dogs. And you're like, it's because the first dog bit you, right? Or because your parents told you the dog was scary or something like that, right? So yeah, those first experiences have a big impact on how we understand the world. What about sexism? Does that have anything to do with sexism? What about anyism? Essentialism? You know what that word essentialism means? It's a serious question. Do you know the word essentialism? How many people have ever heard of that word before? That's it? The word essentialism, basically racism is a kind of essentialism. Sexism is a kind of essentialism, right? All sorts of essentialisms are when we kind of reduce a person, right, or a thing or any new thing that we encounter, right? This new, unique, complex, let's call it maybe a person. So we can think about this person as being a new, unique, complex person, right? With personality and history and background and uniqueness. But if I look at it and I'm like, I've seen people like him before, right? I don't need to know about him. I put him in this box, right? Comparing him to all these people. That's essentialism, right? Reducing a person to some sort of essential characteristic, which is basically what this whole chain of comparative relation is showing, right? How we understand these first experiences with any archetype. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about a person of a different color, a person of a different gender, a person of a different religious tradition, a person of a different ethnicity, a person of a different whatever, right? We experience those, right, for the first time at some point, and we learn about those at some point, and those are our archetypes, right? And sometimes we experience archetypes when we're older in life, for sure, right? All the time. Get the point, right? So what anchors our knowledge? Those archetypes. And where do we learn most of those archetypes? When we're kids, that have to do with our particular background, our particular where we're coming from, right? So we're going to talk about this a lot more in the next chapter on phenomenology, when we talk about perspectival starting points, like where are we coming from, how it shapes our perspective as a human person, right? So then I know a little bit about just because we met and talked, right? So I know that background is very different than my background, right? And so then we have different experiences and that kind of stuff, which can help us actually to have more confidence in how we know what we know. How can that help us to encounter people that have different backgrounds or different perspectives or different experiences? How can that help us to be more certain in what we know? Yeah. Good. Good. Very good. Talking to people who come from very different backgrounds, does that help us to learn the limitations of our own knowledge, right? Or to learn our own ignorance? So then we can see, all right, I'm coming at things from this perspective. I've understood these things in this way. But, you know, when we're talking about this person or this thing or whatever, right, wouldn't it be helpful to know, like, how Lena experiences this thing or how Zach experiences this thing? And to see these things from multiple perspectives helps us get an understanding of this new, unique, complex person in a broader way. How? By understanding what anchors our knowledge and what anchors another person's knowledge, right? And get a sense, learning our own ignorance or finding out what we don't know, right? The limitation of our knowledge. Word? Cool? Word. All right, let's move on. When you look at this, just visually, does it remind you of anything? I mean, you've seen it in like March Madness, I guess, right? Was that on your head? Yeah. I mean, it reminds you of it, so it is the right answer. Okay, family tree, right? So then you can say, like, the family tree is you have some sort of patriarch or matriarch. There's people that then got married and had these kids and these kids and these kids, right? And so you can trace your family tree back to that. Yeah. Yeah, right? Do you know what the word evolution means? Anybody study biology? You know the etymology? The origin of the word evolution. What does the word evolution mean? Let's think about some similar related words. So we've got evolve and then involve. What all these have to do with involve and evolve and envelope and everything? The word evolve literally means unfolding. Unfolding, right? So one thing unfolding. If we've got a piece of paper, right? So if we've got one thing that is simple, so unfolding from simple to complex. And the word plex means fold, right? So confold, with folds. So you've got a simple thing unfolding, like a family tree, or like evolution of species. One simple thing, right, that's unfolding. So we're not ripping it apart, right? It's not becoming many different things, but it's just one thing that's more complex, right? One thing with folds in it, so we can understand evolution in that sense, right? That like there's this one thing that's then unfolding into many different kinds of things, right? So the word evolution means unfolding. All right, let's talk about sex. I always like talking about sex. So sex looks like this, vaguely. So when a man and woman love each other very much and the Catholic priest says go for it, then you've got DNA then splits in half. It's like a ladder made up of GTAC, and then half of this ladder joins with half of this ladder, right? So you starts with a bottle of Chianti, and then after some candles and a bottle of Chianti, then there's like unzip and then rezip, right? And then so these two unzip and then rezip. So then you got something new, which is not the same as what came before, right? But also not totally different than what came before, right? So it has some comparative relation to what came before, right? But it's also something new, something innovative, something unique, something new, an innovation, a new creation, right? So procreation, so a creation that's creating forward, right? Where these two things, you get it, right? There's unzip and then the zip. There's something really cool, I think, about this. I mean, maybe a few things are really cool about this. But one thing really cool about this is that you're literally passing material, right? Matter, a material seed and a material egg, material RNA and DNA that's passed from one person, right? The seed goes into an egg, and then you've got that's where it happens after the unzip, and then that leads to the zip, right? But material coming together to form something new. But what also is cool about it is it's not just material, but it's also information. So what DNA is, it's like a blueprint. It's like the instruction manual, right? It's biology's way of saying, hey, this is how to build a human, right? So we're taking some information from mom and some information from dad and putting it together and making new instruction manual, right? New blueprints. Which is information. It's information that's in a material form, but it's also passing information from one to the next, isn't it? Ideally, you want humans that are reproducing to be like not so much related to each other, right? Ideally, right? I'm from South Carolina, so it's a little different down there. But ideally, you want mom and dad to not be, Oh, when I was in high school, I dated this girl. And it was amazing. She was on the flag line. I was band captain. She was on the flag line. Man, she was really. It was like one of the best 2 weeks of my. It was really great 2 weeks. And then I went off to college, and one summer I came home from college and we ran into each other, and she's like, let's have lunch. And we went out for lunch, and it was like catching up and that kind of stuff. Like asking her if she's dating anybody or anything like that. And she said, yeah, I've been dating this guy. I've been dating this guy for like a month now. And I was like, how did you meet? She's like, well, you know where this is going, right? We met at the family reunion. And I was like, what? What? And she's like, yeah, we met at the family reunion. And I was like, what? And I was like, she's like, yeah, he's my cousin's brother. And I was like, your cousin's stepbrother? No. Your cousin's half brother? No, my cousin's brother. I'm like, all right. So then I realized why it didn't work out for us, right? It didn't work out for us because I didn't have her blood, right? I didn't have her genetic material. I didn't have what she was looking for, which was close familial relations or something, right? Ideally, we want to be with somebody, we want to procreate with somebody who's not genetically related to us, right? The more distant, the better, right? So the more genetic diversity, the better, right? We don't want genetic inbreeding. So we want a flux of new information, right? New genetic information, right? New genetic information, diverse genetic information. Feel me? See where this is going? What does this have to do with how do we know what we know? How does it do with knowledge? Or how do we know if what we know is true or not? Maybe if our archetypes come from those people that are closest to us, those people in our immediate surroundings, in our milieu, right? In our family, in our culture, in our society, our neighborhood, the people that live around us, the people that think the way that we do, they think the way we do because they raised us, right? Or we think the way they do because this is how we were raised, right? But then that means that everything in that line is kind of understood in a similar comparative relation, right? Isn't that the whole point of like we all think the same way or whatever? But then couldn't it be that the same mistakes or the same misunderstandings are just being passed along? If you got standing water, what happens to standing water? It stands there and gets stagnant for a long time. You get mosquitoes in it, you get mold in it, and you get all this kind of stuff. You don't want to drink that water, right? It's not, it's good for, I guess, for the microorganisms and stuff that are growing there. But if you get like fresh water flowing in, right? Fresh water from all sorts of different sources that are flowing into that stream, right? Then it can bring a freshness and a newness and get rid of that stagnation, and right? So maybe we want the similar kind of thing. The same way that we want our intercourse to be with people who are genetically diverse, right? Maybe we also want our discourse to be with people who have different backgrounds and who understand the world through comparative relation, but have a differing understanding even of those same archetypes that we have, but see them from a new perspective so that we can begin to learn our own ignorance and understand what we don't know so that we understand the world with more certainty, more confidence, and have less anxiety. See what I did there? Wrapped up the whole lesson in like a couple of sentences. Okay, I just want to clarify a couple points and, pull all this together. Again, this chapter is on epistemology. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that asks, how do we know what we know? Now, epistemology is near the center of our systematic philosophy schematic, which means that it changes far less often than things like emotions and states of mind, which, change all the time.
I changed my mind!
In the previous section, we learned from Nicholas of Cusa that humans learn through comparative relation, which means that we learn archetypes when we are young children, and we learn those primarily from our parents and caregivers when we are first learning language and the world around us, usually when we're ages like 2 to 6 years old. Now those archetypes don't change. They're like anchors. When we experience something new, we experience that new information in comparative relation to those archetypes that we learned as kids. In this section, I pointed out that our knowledge unfolds or evolves from those archetypes. I then drew a direct comparison between this evolution of knowledge and genetic reproduction. Now we all know that incest is bad. If we don't know, we should know. Incest is bad. Genetic inbreeding is like stagnant water. It putrefies. In a very similar way, intellectual incest is bad. If we only have discourse with people with similar backgrounds and life experiences as us, then our understanding of the world becomes stagnant. It putrefies. As we'll see later in this course, Socrates repeatedly draws the same comparison between intercourse and discourse. Intellectual incest is bad for the same reasons and in the same ways that genetic incest is bad. If we want to be more certain about what we believe to be true, then we need to have discourse with people who are very different from us, meaning people who have learned those archetypes in a very different environment than we have. People who have different parents and different caregivers and different backgrounds than us. Hope that clears things up.